Welcome to the Awkward Conversations podcast. My name is Damien.
My name's Kieran.
And today our guest was Robbie Butler from the UUP. Really interesting, very friendly guy. Decent sense of humor too, actually. So what kind of struck me about this podcast is, we covered a range of topics, but particularly his fostering of kids, him and his wife, who I believe they've fostered around 40 kids. And how that impacted on his life is really, really interesting.
Yeah, they fostered a huge amount of children over the years, and we'll probably speak to very few people who've had as vastly different career as Robbie Butler. He's worked as a butcher, he's worked in the prison service and the fire brigade, and now as a member of the Ulster Unionist Party. So the career changes he's had has been huge, and he's got a lot of interesting stories from all of that.
Yeah, we think you'll really enjoy this podcast. So have a listen, enjoy. If there's anyone else you would like us to interview or to have on the podcast, please comment in the section below. Please hit us a like and please share this podcast so more people get to see it. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, look, we have been kind of trolling through politicians we'd be really interested in talking to, and you were definitely very high up in our list, almost more so because of your personal life rather than like your political life, because your personal life is very interesting.
That's a backhanded insult there, Damo.
Is it really? No, I don't mean it like that.
I can try that on my election literature when I go around. Don't ask me about policies, just ask me about the person. The person. It'd be quite good to get people to vote actually for a person that I'm probably reaching in too far and suggesting that there's some good stuff in there that you liked, but it is probably good to try to encourage people to look beyond the politics, sometimes the policy, and see the person and see if they can like or connect with or trust the person, I suppose.
100%. Who's the soundest on the ballot paper?
Yeah.
Or as young people, who's the goat?
Yeah.
Who's the goat?
Yeah, often we're very much into this idea of these are our entrenched camps here in Northern Ireland. Who's the enemy, and like it's crazy to even think of another side of the community as an enemy, when really, if you knew them as people, I think that kind of language would die down and would be able to get a lot more done.
100%.
So I was very curious to ask you about the fact your family are very big into fostering kids. And am I right in saying you fostered up to close to 40 kids? Is that so far? Is that right?
So yeah, I think last month I did a little wee article in and around fostering and adoption, basically because the Robin Swan had brought through children and adoptions legislation. There was stuff getting talked about in the media, which actually wasn't about the legislation, but it was really good timing. And then, me and my wife have been involved in fostering for about 17 years, I think now. So I've two grown-up kids, they're 23 and 21. And we have also fostered in a number of kids, over about 17 years when we had our kids. And then more recently, then we have taken on 3 permanents. So they're not foster kids. They're not adopted either. It's called a special guardianship order. So it's as close as you get to adoption. They are our kids, and they will be with us until they're adults. So
wow.
We've just expanded the family we never had 3 in the house before, except when we were fostering, but we never had 3 to keep, if you know what I mean. So.
And how do you find balance in that with your workload? Is that tricky, or?
It's incredibly tough. Yeah, absolutely. It's really incredibly tough. So we always had to do a balance, but we always had our own kids too. So for any working family, any couple or any single person who has a child, if the child is their own or adopted or fostered or whatever, there are always challenges. So obviously, if my wife works, she's a nurse, and for either of us, then these kids are young, so there's obviously the school, but the reality is that's how families operate today anyway. Mm-hmm. So and we think of these kids very much as our own kids now. So that's if you had 2 or 3 kids or a child, you'll know sometimes the impact that has and how you have to factor your life around that and adjust.
And do you come from? Did your family adopt, or did your wife's family adopt, or how did you get into it, or what was the?
No, do you know what? I genuinely don't know the absolute answer to that. I'll defer to that. It was I would imagine it was my wife that probably brought the subject up, because generally we do what she wants and then we're happy. I'd love to be able to say, oh, it was my idea and I saw all these children in need. Well, we did hear about, that we were aware that there was a need. There were a lot of children in care and stuff. I grew up in the Low Road in Lisburn, and there was a children's it was called a children's home in Glenmore there. So I was always aware of the kids that came in and out of there and stuff. But neither of our families had any experience, so we were like a dry hit at it.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So presumably, Robbie, then a lot of these kids that from back at the start then are probably under their 20s and have probably moved on maybe a fair bit since then. So is there any contact, or do you ever hear from any of the early ones to see how they're going?
Unfortunately not. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I would love to know a little bit more about all of them, and some in particular. And I spoke about this in the chamber. The very first one that we got, a wee boy, he was 2.5 when we got him, and we had him for about 8 weeks, and we saw a remarkable transformation in those 8 weeks, and he was a lovely, lovely, lovely boy. And then we ended up, I'll make this a shorter story, but we ended up with his sister about 2 years later, and we didn't know it was a sister. Well, turned out when we found out it was a sister, they were the double of each other. So we knew when we saw her, she thought, wow, she looks like somebody we've met before. And in that family, so that was a family with a lot of trauma and difficulties. Who I think all the kids out of that home then went into some kind of care. We were privileged to spend some time with both of them, and I would love to know what happened, particularly perhaps to those two and all of them. Now, I think things will change in the future, and I think it'll change for the better. So, for instance, this is probably quite an easy to understand analogy. When these kids come to you, because of the sort of troubled start they have in life and a wee bit of trauma and things like that, their memories are incredible. So they will remember things right through their life. So I have a big dog, as you probably know anyway, big St. Bernard, and she's lovely. And a lot of these kids have met this big dog and would have good memories of a big dog. But the way it was set up in the past is that story wouldn't follow them through life. So they would have this memory of a big dog, but they might not be able to place it. Why do I like big dogs, or why do I not like big dogs? What is it about big dogs? So now they're developing a story for the kid, for the young people, so that they'll maybe be able to keep, like, you stayed in a house with Mr. and Mrs. B, and they had a big dog called Minnie, and a picture of the dog or something will go, and then that'll help the child. So selfishly, yes, I want to remember, but it's more important that those kids, that they're told the truth, or enough of the truth is shared with them that they understand what's happening.
What's the longest period of time you've looked after kids, apart from your current 3 children?
We probably didn't have any kids for any more than about 2 months. So we did mostly short-term emergency and respite, and the bulk of that being respite for other foster carers who would do the full-time stuff. And that's an incredibly important role, because the foster families, and there's some incredible foster families about that do infinitely more work than we ever did, and help a lot more kids. And they need a break sometimes, maybe either with just as a couple or with their own kids, maybe, to do that other piece. So that's a role that people can do. So people talk about, I'm not going to foster because it takes up too much commitment. Well, you can foster and do as little as maybe a week or 2 a year. Wow. If you're there to provide respite for another family, but you've been through all the tests and checks, why would you not do that?
So,
and that makes, yeah.
So you can test it out on the smallest of scales to see if it's for you, and then decide to go bigger.
Absolutely. And I would say, and genuinely, I think it would be a very, listen, it's not easy, but it's very rewarding. But I don't think, like, for instance, respite stuff, so for doing a couple of weeks a year, it would be beyond too many people, because it is very rewarding. Now, sometimes you get a child who has maybe it's slightly more challenging because of the background or whatever, or some difficulties, but the support is getting better. The support that you can get is getting better. It's not perfect, but it's getting there.
Do you think getting involved with fostering has changed your idea of different people's circumstances, like in our society?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that it has. We would have been probably particularly, I've always been in and around the community anyway, in terms of, so I grew up in the housing estate in the Low Road, and I've always stayed about Lisburn, but even the jobs and my sort of pathway, my career pathway has always kept me quite close to working with families and people and around people. So I had a good idea, but what you probably do see is when you see maybe, and you for this, so the know now, for instance, in Northern Ireland, when we talk about the mental health crisis that we have, okay, that most of that most of the genesis of that will come out of some level of trauma, whether it's the trauma of Northern Ireland and then the parenting that didn't happen, or whether it's a trauma that happened to you as a child or the adverse childhood experiences. Well, kids that come from that background inevitably will have had already, sadly, a fair share of adverse experiences, and then that's really incredible and good to know, because it helps inform you for how you then respond and behave, as a carer.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think particularly here in Northern Ireland, I read previously that trauma can actually change you and alter your DNA. So as a result, if you father, mother children or give birth children, that actually impacts on your child's DNA. So not only do the environmental factors and the stresses that you probably carry just from the trauma of a memory, it's biological as well as in your words and in your in terms of the rates of mental health issues in Northern Ireland, whether it be suicide or whatever, I genuinely believe there's a legacy that's of the Troubles, a mental health legacy, as well as our historical and current political.
Yeah. There's no doubt. The Professor Jim Dorn, who's the late Jim Dorn, he's passed away sadly. He spoke on that very issue in the trauma conference in Belfast a number of years ago. And he was talking about, for instance, so you're talking about the stuff that's passed on, and actually even reproductively. So if a woman is in a violent relationship, shall we say, and so if you think about the pregnancy and the wee unborn baby, and then maybe the abusive environment and all of those things that are released within a pregnant mom, because you can understand how smoking would affect and how drinking alcohol and taking drugs, you can understand that bit, but it's those neural pathways. And then I suppose what they're discovering about the brain is it's constantly growing, it's constantly evolving, all these neural pathways. But the most important bit is pre-birth and birth, and those early years. That's when all the magic happens. Or sadly, sometimes a lot of the darker stuff and not so magic, and then that can really sort of set the chart. But what I would genuinely say is there's huge there's real chance for better, for hope, for change. If you get a child early, or you get a child out of that environment and into a secure loving space, that the magic then can happen, and things will change for the better. Absolutely. And sometimes it's harder than others, but it will always change for the better.
So this idea of neuroplasticity, the brain will mold and adapt as a result of that loving environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So essentially, it's easier to fix a child than it is to fix an adult. 100%. In the most crudest of terms.
Well, yeah, listen, I'm not going to start preaching at you, but it says something in the Bible about show me a boy when he's 7, I'll show you the man. And people take the Bible all they want, but it's pretty good in that respect. It's an any child. So I'm the chatty man now. Well, guess what? When I was 7, I was a pretty chatty guy. I can remember being shut up quite a bit by my mum and stuff. And if my wife is really quiet outside of the house, she's not so quiet inside the house, but she's very quiet outside the house. And I would say, when she was a child, when she was 7, she'd have been a very quiet child too, So
mm-hmm.
It's really important to see those early years, see from even just pre-birth right through till those early primary years. Those are the golden years to really shape and make a change and make a difference. But we should never stop. We should never not say that there's any cutoff, because we all evolve at different stages and times. But as you said, the neuroplasticity, I nearly said that right, of our brains is and my brain's still changing.
Hopefully all our brains are still changing for the better.
Hopefully.
Robbie, one of the things that we were interested in, or that excited us, was your previous life. Your early career. You started off working as a butcher. How did you get into that there, Robbie?
I was leaving school. I was maybe in 5th year, and I had no career aspiration. I just wanted to work, and I wasn't doing very well at school. So and I didn't have any academic path. Just wanted to work and get a few pound, because we didn't have a lot of money back home. And I met someone whose dad owned a butcher shop in Lisburn, and literally they just phoned me up one day at home. Didn't have mobiles back in the day, so it was a landline. And I think my mum answered the phone or something, and they said, "Do you think Robert would like, they called me Robert back then. Would Robert like a job in the butchers? And I went in, and so whilst I was in 5th year in school, I worked on Saturdays, and then about a few months before I left school, I started getting in on an afternoon, and then the guy just said, "Do you want to work? Do you want a job?" And I just said, "Yeah." I literally didn't even think about it. I'd been offered a job, and I was like, "Yeah." So that was 1988, and I started as a butcher, and I was getting £40 a week, £40 a week, and I was working about, I would say, between 50 and 60 hours a week easily.
Oh.
It was, I'm not joking, it was.
That would get you about 20 litres of diesel
today. And then 10 litres of diesel tomorrow. It was something that was it was really hard work. But when I'm talking to any young people today, everything you do in life comes back at you. Every connection you make, and so I worked as a butcher in Lisburn for many, many years, even when I moved on to the prison and the police, prison and the fire service. I still always kept my hand in making sausages and counter work and stuff. But I met literally thousands of people in Lisburn on that counter, thousands, and every one of those, like, people will vote for me. They'll say, "Oh yes, you're wee Robbie the butcher. I remember you, and you were great and whatever." And the other flip side of that is, if it had been an absolute tube, that I said,
Yeah.
"You're Robbie the tube." Not a chance. And so through these shops that I worked in, families were raised through them. So a lot of maybe the young girls and young fellas who were coming in as kids are now got their own kids. And I meet them now and again. Went into one of the shops last Saturday. I couldn't get out of it. It was just customer after customer came in, and I ended up talking to the guy that owns the shop now. I think he was getting a wee bit peeved because we were reminiscing about all these stories from about 30 years ago, and it was lovely. It was lovely.
Do you ever get, that would stress me. I'd see, like, I'm a teacher, so I would get to meet a lot of people, in the community and whatever else. But there's never like a greater moment of panic when I see someone out of the context in which I know them, because I will never remember their name. Are you good with that? Are you good with people's names?
No, because I'll call you. If I seen you two in Lisburn next day, I said, "All right, mate." All right, chum. And you guys would be going, "Hi, Robbie." And then I'd be waiting for you to say something like, "Yes, we had a podcast with you last week." And then I'll go, "All right, yes." And then we'll do this, man. So for me, and I've met that many people, I'm really poor with names, guys. Really poor. Really, really bad. And I used to get told off in the shop for calling the women love. I used to say, "Can I get you anything, love?" And then I used to say to the guys, just, "What can I get you, mate?" And the odd person used to be offended by that. So sometimes if a woman didn't want to be called love, you'd be told. And I had some guy say, "I'm not your mate." I was like, "Oh."
They'll be as offended as vegetarian voters are when they listen to this. They're like, "I can't vote for Robbie."
Vote for Robbie because, and I actually, the job itself is a great job, and you can't get a butcher these days. Like, literally, there's so few butchers about. There's no butchers in supermarkets and stuff now, because they just get everything in packaged and they slice it. I just call them meat slicers and keep them going. And there is a skill shortage, and there's a shortage of butchers, people who can actually bone a hind quarter, a forequarter, display it, manufacture it, and then do the bit on the counter. It's actually I used to think that it wasn't much of a job because it didn't pay well. But see, when I think back, it's actually it's an interesting job, and actually you actually do need to be quite good at what you do and have an understanding of it.
Yeah, I think the butchers that have survived now, any butcher that I know of because someone has told me this butcher's really, really good.
Yes.
So obviously people just go there and, talking about, dealing with people, do you get trolls on Twitter? I suppose being a politician, it's just a guaranteed thing.
I do, okay, and I think I've identified 6 people that have been assigned to me, okay. Literally, so I know that there's no matter, there's a couple of, if I put up stuff, there's a couple, and it doesn't matter what the topic is, they always come in with the same thing, okay, and they're quite political. So I know the background they're coming from, and I know whatever, and they seem to be assigned to me, but I have got off quite light because there's like a Doug Beattie or Naomi Long or maybe Carla Lockhart or maybe Michelle O'Neill, and they get much worse. But I think they all sometimes get much worse because they punch back quite, especially Naomi and Doug. They go into Twitter and they go on, bounce back and whatever. I can't be bothered most of the time, and mostly, almost. I really don't like responding to people I don't know. So if you're not prepared to put your face and your name on, I have only responded to like maybe 1% of the people who have responded. Now and again, I'll respond to one if I think it's maybe not a troll. It's just someone who isn't prepared to put their face and name to it. I've got to be honest. I don't think you should be allowed to do that on Twitter because it's such a powerful platform now. If it was totally fun, fair enough, but it's not fun. It's such a powerful platform. I think you should have to. If you're going to say something, I think you should have to literally front up and be who you are.
Yeah.
Because politicians are so accessible. We are, and there's nothing special about us, but we're so accessible, but we have families and we are ordinary people and we're trying to do our best. I was on the education, there was a debate today, a big vote on the integrated education bill. And we'll get critiqued because of what we did. Because here's the thing, everybody was telling us to do the right thing, but the right thing for different people is different things.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of politics. But Twitter expands that into a real negative, and some of the stuff's really rank,
Do you mind if I ask you about that? I teach in an integrated school, so I probably have a dog in the race, if you like. What was the thinking behind, or what was the justification? And forgive my ignorance because I genuinely haven't been following it really, really closely, but I'm aware of the rough headlines of that you guys, the UUP, weren't for it at this point, in the form in which it came in.
Yeah,
I think it was the poor quality of teachers in integrated schools, Damon. But
you definitely don't want to put me in that. We could live in like a valley, for all I know. Right around that house, nobody's against integrated education. But my perception is that most of us in the public who haven't used maybe integrated education believe integrated education to be the primary purpose about it to get good numbers of Protestant and Catholic kids in the same school building being educated together. Okay. Now, at the moment, 50% of integrated schools don't meet the targets for. Thank you. Where you go, wee man? I missed you too. So when this bill came in, I thought, okay, an integrated education bill, maybe it's going to be ambitious. Maybe it's going to do what it says in the tin, and it's going to try and get more kids from a Catholic and Protestant background into more schools and stuff, but it doesn't. What the first two clauses do is it dilutes what I believe integrated education is and should be. So it broadens it out to just be reasonable numbers of any kids from any background, and including reasonable numbers of Protestant Catholics. So for me, it diluted and brought the integrated education sector very much into where the control sector already is. And that's okay. And that's okay if the control sector wants to do it. I know you're going to probably argue with me, Damien.
No, I'm not.
But this is just.
I'm listening. I'm hearing you out.
And then there's a thing. My main bugbear was the strategy. So throughout this, other stakeholders are saying there's finite budgets here, and we can't afford to be detrimentally impacted. So I spoke to the bill sponsor, and throughout the debates, we were told that there would be no detrimental impact, fiscal. So I sought to put an amendment in at the last round, which was basically put it on the face of the bill. There will be no detrimental impact to you, but they voted against that. Now, if they voted against that, they voted against it for a reason, because they're willing to accept that there might be a detrimental impact fiscally to other schools. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but for me, it wasn't right.
Yeah.
So therefore, that was my red button to say, well, I can no longer support this. Mm-hmm. And when the bill sponsor, and I'm on record saying we wanted to support it because we do believe educating our children together is vitally important. What was shared with me was that the bill sponsor wants to move it more towards an ethos as opposed to. So basically, I was saying, so if you're from West Belfast, for instance, and you live in an area which is predominantly Catholic, like 99%, are you going to bus kids to a school, mix them across? No, you're not. You're going to go to the nearest school. And eventually, any school could be an integrated school as long as the ethos is there. So therefore, you're not. For me, that doesn't do what we need to do. We need children to meet each other in that place and in that space. Do you know what I mean? And so,
yeah, it's interesting. Like I have my own issues with integrated schools in the sense that I love the idea of integration. I think it's really, really important, and I buy into integration like really wholeheartedly because I remember getting to uni and having like maybe one or two Protestant friends because I'm from a Catholic background, and it was just crazy. Like, and it was just like I remember speaking to like a friends in England, and it blew their mind. They literally couldn't understand it. And it's like, I'll do you one better, lads. Like, I don't have any non-white friends either. And they were like,
Well, you only had two friends, Timo, so it wasn't that.
And I'm starting to think I need better friends, Kieran.
The bill, Damien, is, the bill inevitably has some good in it. I think there's parts of it just don't work. And the minister wrapped it up incredibly well. There are unintended consequences with the bill, which are going to make it very difficult for integrated schools now to operate, actually. I mean, it was incredible stuff towards the end of the debate to listen into. But I do believe the bill sponsor at the start of it, their intentions were good. And, but this is the thing about politicians, we get labelled with all sorts of stuff. And most of the ones that I have met are actually decent people. It's just a strange arena to be operating in.
Yeah, the thing I find interesting about integrated schools is integrated doesn't necessarily mean integrated. Integrated just means Christian, but Christian Catholic or Christian Protestant. So it's really interesting that when you think of the word integrated, I think of like kind of all religions and none.
Yes.
But it's interesting that we don't do that here in Northern Ireland. We have.
There's also, I mean, there was a couple of amendments offered up by the humanists for the integrated bill to take faith out of schools completely.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a growing community, if you like, who just want to strip all faith, not just Christian faith, but all faith out of school. Now they will dress it up and say, we don't mind a wee bit of RE taught, but what they actually want in that isn't RE taught. They want a new curriculum that actually probably promotes humanism as much as anything. And from their perspective, that might be fair. I've been a Christian since I was 8. I'm very strong in my faith. I don't ram it down anybody's throat, but I do see the good in it. When I went in 2018 to Dublin to see the Pope, I got a lot of stick from predominantly probably some people in my own community. And when I came back and was interviewed, they asked me about it, and I'd said when I went down as a Christian Protestant Unionist. When I came back up, guess what? I was still a Christian Protestant Unionist. It was fine. It was actually very good. It was a great experience. There was nothing to fear, and unfortunately, we're all sold fear. Wherever our background is, it's like demons over there. They're looking to change, looking to get at you, looking to do you, and you're going like, oh my, stop it, guys, come on. It's all like, you talk about propaganda. This place has been propaganda city for decades. Radicalization, this place has been radicalizing kids for decades. You look at those far off countries across in Afghanistan, and you see young kids and stuff, and you think they were radicalized here, and unfortunately, in some instances, they're still being radicalized.
What I find really interesting is that we have two different communities, and I have friends from both sides of the community, and what I notice is that their histories are different. We all share the same history, but the history from my Protestant friends is different from the history from my Catholic friends, and it's like there doesn't seem to be
the same thing, but
like a factual meeting in the middle kind of.
It will be interesting, and I think it would be quite revealing if anybody was able to ever write an absolutely indoctrinated story, and all of us will squirm. Everybody will squirm.
Yeah.
Everybody will squirm. Because I'll tell you, we have jails all over the world in all countries full of people who do things. We're not unique here. We have people who had a greater propensity to do stuff. We have people who were radicalized. We have people who genuinely did things and they thought they were doing it out of they were just so convinced that it was right. But we also had evil people doing bad things. I mean, some of the stuff, when you read through the books and you realize, you see how people were actually brutalized.
Mm-hmm.
Not just somebody was killed, but the brutal manner in which people were killed reveals something much more dark, much more sinister. But that exists everywhere. It exists in Dublin, it exists in Manchester, it exists in London. We have it, and we call it bigotry and sectarianism. Over there, it's racism or sexism or whatever, and it's man's inhumanity to man. So, but what I think we need to do is look at what we've done actually since 1998 in particular, and there's been huge strides, and sometimes we forget that and we neglect actually that this is a contested space, and there's no doubt, there's no need for anybody to say anything different. for me, there is a solution. There will be a solution, and it won't necessarily just be Robbie Butler's solution, but it has to be done through dialogue and an agreement. And we do have a space and a place here that is worth sharing.
You guys would reach the hand of friendship a bit more over the aisle than perhaps the DUP wouldn't. I think that's fair to say. I don't think I got too much flack for that, but particularly it was quite notable that you had the kids playing GAA in your literature and your campaign literature. Did you get any flack for that, or
what was it? Yeah, we did. So. I mean, Doug particularly is very strong on his union of people, and our party conference was actually really good. We had a play on. It was a challenging play to watch. At the end, it wasn't shown, publicly, I don't think. Brilliant play at about the time of the creation of Northern Ireland, or partition, whatever way you want to look at it. It was incredible because even as a unionist Protestant background, you're listening to some challenging narrative, but similarly, you'd been listening to a challenging narrative from a nationalist, a Catholic perspective. We had Irish dancing, we had Scottish dancing, and we had different things on there, and we did and that was, and it wasn't to suggest that everybody needs to go out and start playing Gaelic or playing Ireland, but what it's saying, it's absolutely right and proper that if you want to, you can, you should. Now, on the other hand, the GAA still need to do more like, obviously there would have been a lot of negative stuff coming back last week after there was a memorial that Michelle O'Neill was at, the memorial in the GA ground. I mean, that would set things back inextricably. That's just fundamentally wrong. I think to sport and venue and stuff, but equally I'd be against a shrine to anybody that would be involved in terrorism or in any sports ground, football, rugby, hockey. It's just not right. So. But yeah, we did get stick about it. But you said about we don't come across as the DUP, and that's good because I am a politician because of the DUP. So if anybody asks me why did you get into politics, that big part of it is because of the DUP. Because I've said to you, I have a strong faith. That's my most important thing. And I was looking at politicians, and I love Northern Ireland. And I was looking at politics, and I never thought I'd leave the fire brigade, but I want Northern Ireland to work. And I looked at the politicians who are supposed to represent me. And I always quite liked the Ulster Unionist Party, but I wasn't a member or anything, quite liked them. But looked at the DUP, and what disappointed me was those were the people who were supposed to be Christians. They're supposed to be, born-again Christians and stuff. And I thought, well, I'm a born-again Christian, I'm a unionist, but I don't like the way they're talking. I don't like that message. I don't like that vibe. And I thought, well, they're not representing me. I'll maybe give it a go. And I chose another vehicle, which was the Ulster Unionist Party. It's not a Christian party. There are Christians in the party, like myself. So the difference is, I think the DUP purport to be a Christian party, but I don't see a whole lot of it in it.
Yeah.
Apart from taking stances on things like abortion and things like that, that's a given for anybody that's maybe pro-life and stuff. But that's not exclusive to Christians either, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
They don't own that ground. But for me, it's like how the message comes out. So it isn't because we all have different messages, right? That's not the important bit. Isn't trying to get anybody onto your message. The important is how you deliver and share your message. For me, that's the piece. And you may not agree with me, but if I can deliver it with courage, confidence, and you can believe me, and we can respectfully agree or disagree, I think that does so much more than trying to break everything with a hammer.
No, that's it. Like, I'd be an alliance voter and would be genuinely that's the kind of politics I'm interested in.
Kieran, me and you are talking next. Damien's off his land.
Damien's nailed his flag to the mast on everything here today.
Poured his heart out for my podcast.
I've always said to Damien, there's nothing more entrenched than an alliance voter.
Oh boy, I just call them strong. Yeah,
we had Naomi Long on the last episode we did, and I think it was the ginger hair connection they had.
They'll have clicked here. Kieran, you won't have had to say it much anyway when Naomi on. she'll have filled all the spaces.
I know we had a long list of questions, and like we got like one question in, like just a whole page of questions like we didn't ask.
She's an impressive woman.
She's unbelievable. I'm really.
But I genuinely just don't get some of the politics. I genuinely don't. I find, I don't know if Naomi's driving this. Remember when I was on a Nolan show one night, and I think it was Nuala McAllister was on, and the question was, it's time to end orange and green politics, and Nuala was very strong. I find it very offensive. I found it a very offensive statement. Because for me, where the alliance were many years ago, where the party that put a hand out each side and didn't say anything about anybody and brought everybody together and said, you're good and you're good and we're going to meet in the middle. And I love that space. But now it's time to end orange and green politics, and not saying that you do, but I get the vibe that everything's the fault of orange and green. Orange and green for me is what they're saying is nationalism and unionism, and then this middle ground elevates themselves above, as opposed to just being the people in the middle that bring it all together, you know. So I don't know if that is actually the way it is. That's how it's perceived, and that's how it makes me feel at times.
Yeah.
You know? And I know Chris Little would be not on that page. Chris Little is a fabulous. I seriously miss Chris Little. He's the chair of the education committee, so I know Chris isn't in that space. However, there definitely are people in that space, and more so, I think. And listen, everybody can have their position, and the Alliance are very vocal at the minute and sharing their position.
Yeah. Kieran, I just want to touch back on something, because Kieran and I spoke about this actually last week, and we'd have different views on that shrine and on the really? GAA grounds. Did you want to add anything to that, Kieran? Or if you don't want to talk about it either, that's fine too.
Well, we argued about the GAA ground, and we kind of it was more about in terms of, we looked at that space, but then we says, but then that memorial wouldn't have been welcomed in, say, a main town square. So I suppose in terms of the family of them, they thought, well, where would it be welcome? And they were members, and then obviously it became political whenever, you know, local politicians came to the unveiling on that, and then that brought it into the political sphere. But then obviously, accept Robbie's point, as in they were kind of looking at the GAA as a potential cross community body, and then the kind of situation that event had left the GAA open to criticism.
The challenge I would have is that it's a publicly funded sports, and like you rightly said, kind of maybe impacts on the cross community element that the GAA as a body is trying to promote.
Yeah, I think the point I argued with you, Damien, and I just enjoy arguing with Damien on anything really, is that, well, I suppose regardless, like, if you would be against it, does everybody deserve a memorial? Does anybody deserve a memorial? And where do you put them? Do you put them on places that are public places, or somewhere where they would be only wholly accepted by the immediate surrounding community, you know? So I
would suggest in those instances they're only fitting in around the community where it's championed. And so a sports ground, it's a public space people will visit or be expected or reasonably expected to visit. So for instance, a school wouldn't be a place, or a public park, or somewhere where you would expect someone to go. I mean, when I played football, we used to play against the teams that used to come off. They were just finishing, I think, maybe the Gaelic season or something. They were incredibly fit at the start of the season and stuff. And we went all over the blinking country to play. And you know, at times, when my team was probably mostly Broads, I think maybe one or two Catholics that played for us. It wasn't deliberate. It was just one of those things. I live in a place and went to school like that and stuff. But we went to places where we were picked out as a Broad team, you know, and it was tight going. It really was tight going. Got, you know, and the same would have happened in return, but we didn't dish it out. We punched in the head, kicked around football pitches and all sorts of stuff. When people assume, well, we didn't take anything with us. We didn't wear red, white, and blue kit, and things. So. And then if you're going into a space that has something like that too, I mean the fear that would generate, and for some people the anger too. And so I do accept that there's a story and a narrative there for the family. However, that's where it is. That's kind of in the community. But there's obviously the FIC commission was put together to deal with all this stuff. So there are probably hundreds of unofficial memorials around the country.
Weren't they trying to do something like wasn't a memorial or like a Troubles museum or whatever around the maze? Is that right?
They were trying to do something like that, and that was to go with the Maze Stadium and stuff, and the Maze Stadium would have been brilliant because the Maze Stadium, like in Ballina, of course, I wanted it, but the Maze Stadium would have been a central stadium for basically a national stadium for football, rugby, and Gaelic, and it would have been in an area which isn't a nationalist area, for the Gaelic, for instance, but geographically and arterially brilliant to get to. And it had the space and stuff, but then it fell down over the inability to agree a narrative, as I suppose, for what the memorial piece would look like, given that it was the H blocks there. And that would have been difficult for me from my background. I worked in the prisons for a number of years, so I understand how hard that is to you've got the perspective of prisoners and people that were interned, and then you've got the staff, and I know what it's like for the staff. And there was 33 prison officers murdered over the years.
It's a former teacher of mine. His father was a prison officer. His name was George Foster, and he was murdered by the IRA outside Buffs Club. He worked in the Crumlin Road jailhouse. So he's actually coming on the podcast. He's going to talk a bit about his experience, but he's a pretty amazing guy, like not a sectarian bone in his body, despite the unbelievable tragedy.
Well, this is the interesting thing. And Carol McKillen from Sinn Féin described me about a couple of months ago as probably one of the least sectarian politicians in there. She said something like, "There's not a sectarian bone in your body." And I'm working in there, and I was a prison officer, and I was under threat because it was pre-ceasefire. I was 1996 to 2000, and Jerry Kelly is across, and I speak to Jerry Kelly. Jerry Kelly is obviously very notorious in terms of his background stuff, and Pat Sheehan and different ones. And I talk to them and work with them because that's politics, and I genuinely don't have any hatred. I don't like what happened. I don't like, and I don't agree with the narrative that they have at all. I really don't. And I worked in the Blinken place, so I have a wee bit of understanding. But I understand too that they come from a different background and were brought up with something different than I was, and everybody's truth is slightly different. But what I'm saying is, I'm not interested. I'm not. I remember the past, but I'm using it as a benchmark to do something a whole lot better.
Yeah.
I suppose that is very much what Doug's trying to do in terms of the Union of People stuff too. We're not forgetting about the past. We're not saying it didn't happen. What we're saying is, like, we have competing narratives here. Everybody needs to be entitled to tell the truth. However, my kids and these kids that I'm looking after, this is more important that we get it right for the next generation that's coming through, and learn from maybe the mistakes of my generation. Yeah. I'm 50 this year, so a lot of people my age were involved in things, or suffered. If you're born post 1998, all you've got is the stories, really. And you remember we talked about the adverse childhood experiences and trauma. Well, I suppose even the post ceasefire babies still have that trauma coming through, but they don't understand it in the same way. So you can't. So perhaps and it's maybe worse for them, because there's this wee thing I learned in the fire service. Sometimes you will suffer less trauma if you're at the very front of an incident and you see the stuff and you're trying to help. Sometimes the people that are trying to help but can't get close enough and don't see, it's worse for them because they're playing out things that they don't even see, and they're imagining things maybe worse than actually is happening, or have that there's a regret syndrome that you think you could have done more, or you think you should have done something different, but actually, and I think a lot of the post ceasefire people that have come through carry some of that.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, that the ones in the periphery can almost be suffering a bit more than the ones who are in the cold face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was it like then, on the prison service, Robbie? Like, I mean, you must have had some interesting days.
Hard. It was hard. It's it's one of the most under appreciated roles. It's hard every day. That was brilliant. The camaraderie is excellent. I would go as far as to say the camaraderie in there is better than it is in the fire service, because you're not competing with each other. You really need to have each other's back every day, and it's a challenging environment. And yeah, back in the day, I met some of the most high-profile people of the day, coming through, whether they were visiting other people, whether they were in, and it was chilling. Let's just say some of it was quite chilling. But they do a great job. They're looking after people every day, so it's not just all about just keeping people locked up. It really isn't, and it wasn't even back in the 90s. It really was. I mean, there was workshops down there, and you'll know this anyway, even in the 70s and 80s. Some of the guys particularly came out with incredibly educated. Too. So there's different narratives told about the prison. Some of it's romantic and some of it's quite brutal. and the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Did you have any interactions with dissidents or anything? With dissident prisoners when you were during your time there?
There were no dissidents at that time.
That time
you had the bigger players at that time probably were the LVF and INLA were probably quite active at that time, and the Provost still a bit, but less so. So those were maybe the main protagonists at that stage. So I don't think the dissidents were about at that stage. There was most of them coming through were treated you okay, and just were dead on. I'll be honest. Again, I wasn't directly abused by any of them. I didn't really. Every prison officer was under threat, but most come through just by the time of day. And
you ever see in like Sweden and these Scandinavian countries, they almost have these like open door kind of prisons where there's like 2 prison guards, 2 members of staff to every inmate, and it's all really investing in the person. So it's psychological counseling, it's giving them responsibilities of looking after animals. It's kind of it's really holistic kind of way of engaging. And then when they get out of prison, it's like it's in stages. So they go to like these managed apartments where someone checks in them every day. They have all these different mentors around, and they get them into different lines of work to see what works for them. And it's like a guaranteed job and a huge amount of investment, but they worked out it was still cheaper to do that than it was to arrest the people, bring them through the court system, and because the recidivism, I can never say that word, but you know what I want about it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, so it's the reoffending, the reoffending rate goes down. So for us to get there, and it is a really good model. For us to get there, we would need a societal change over about 20 or 30 years, because the Swedish mentality is different to the Northern Irish mentality, and our mentality is quite into us. We're quite a unique people, shall we say. So there's no doubt that it works, and there have been steps here. For instance, the Young Offender Centre is no longer called the Young Offender Centre; it's called Highbank College Wood, and they have a model which is it's not like that. It's not that, but it's like that, and they have moved. And there's been some resistance to it because, again, you've got that cultural stuff, but actually it's shown to reduce the reoffending rate. Now, what you really need is real investment in the early year stuff. So, and the younger you can get that, and you need to prevent people from getting in. If they go into the Young Offender Centre, reduce the reoffending there. And eventually in 5, 10, 15 years, you'll see the fruit of that, because it's harder to stop someone from reoffending if they're an old player, an old timer, like me.
I've always thought, but that the public, I mean, just talking about, your regular prisoners now, not talking about like political prisoners of the past, but, in terms of like crime and punishment now, I think that's what I see is that the public seem to want punishments more prominently than rehabilitation. Like they want the person punished, and if they become rehabilitated, then fine, but punishment first and rehabilitation second. I would say, like, looking at England's, which I think has become more and more right wing, like they're leaning very heavily towards punishments, where vast portions of the Tory party back the reintroduction of capital punishments, and that's so I think that's, could you really change the prison system if public opinion is so firmly behind punishment of individuals?
So that's why I was saying you need the societal change too. They don't happen in tandem. And I don't think even in Sweden anybody was ever elected on a ticket of saying we're going to invest hundreds of millions of pounds or billions of pounds into rehabilitation, because that wouldn't have got you elected in Sweden either.
No.
So, for instance, the probation board do great work, and the probation board, it's very difficult work. They do the rehabilitation, they do the training, they do the support, but yet it's so easy to vilify them. So easy, because the person that they're trying to help maybe did something particularly grotesque or bad or whatever. You ask people the question, do you want them to be rehabilitated? And it will be 100% yes. But what does that investment look like? And it's very emotive things to talk about. Say when you go to prison to get punished, but actually you probably have quicker access to healthcare. Better access to healthcare, quicker access to dentists, better access to dentists. You're likely to have a TV in your room. You have access to a gym. And people will say, but they're locked up quite a bit. but most of the time they're not actually. It's a regime, yes. But for other people, then the removal of your liberty is punishment enough too. So it's not an easy one to fix, but it's so you need to bring your society along with you, but accept that some people can't be and won't be changed as well, and some people do deserve and do need to be given a chance and whatever. But eventually, part of it is the punishment. To be fair as well, I mean, punishment is fair. It's getting the balance.
I was going to say, Demo, will we ask some of these quick fire questions that we asked everyone?
Yeah.
That we just have a list, just so we see. So we have a list here, and we've asked everyone so far, Robbie. They're just like little quick fire ones, like so. Favorite place to visit in the island of Ireland? So it can be anywhere, north or south, or one of each.
Favorite place to visit?
Yeah.
Let me think. Well, do you know something? There's something about Bangor. Bangor. I love Bangor because my Sunday school trips used to be to Bangor, and that was my summer holidays. A Sunday school trip.
And the fine weather.
Yeah.
So following on from that, favorite holiday destination? Obviously somewhere overseas.
Best place I've ever been was the Maldives.
Oh wow!
Nice. Wow.
It was amazing.
Like Bangor, but different.
When it was lying on the beach, I thought it wasn't Bangor in the picky pool,
Voting rights for 16-year-olds, yes or no?
Yes.
Favorite TV show?
At the minute, Peaky Blinders.
Nice.
I think that they've just started the last series of that, haven't they?
Yep.
I suppose you look like you could be a character if you had the hat.
We get a number one round here,
You're on that age demographic who enjoy wearing those caps to the bars and feeling trendy.
I'm waiting on someone to walk into the assembly like your wee man Healy Ray from the Doyle,
Yeah, that's right. He's a colourful lad. Favorite local musician?
Oh, it would have to be Guy Lightbody, Snow Patrol.
Nice. Favorite movie?
Got two. We'll have to go for two, guys. Okay, so Wonderful Life, Christmas time.
That's
absolutely adore it, and I didn't realise until more recently. I've watched it 100 times about the mental health piece in it and the suicidal piece, and and the level of the message of hope at the end. And then I absolutely adore The Greatest Showman as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman's great now.
Brilliant. Well, bless
Thank you, Robbie.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care.
Well, bless.
Thank you. Bye.
All the best, Robbie. Bye-bye.